Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, and many greetings from Provence, here in France, where outside the Mistral wind is really blowing a gale. Today we continue in our series on taking refuge, and today's talk is about the actual ceremony of taking refuge. As with all things in Dharma, we tend to approach by looking at the three moments: the good beginning, the good middle, which means the main thing itself, and the good conclusion. The good beginning means entering into it with the best motivation. And this is something that was discussed in the very first of these talks on refuge. Why do we take refuge, and what does it mean? But just to reiterate a couple of important, simple points, is that we should go into refuge sure that we want to take it, meaning that we've considered it well, we understand sufficiently what we're doing, and we're really happy to do it. And ideally, we're doing it in the Mahayana spirit of it being our gift to everyone. We are entering on this path as a way of improving our own lives and everybody else's lives by extension. But also, when we take refuge, as we saw, we take refuge in the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, under many aspects. Some of them external, such as the historical Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, or the three kayas, which is the eternal cosmic presence of the awakened mind. And also as something internal, which is Buddha within, the true nature of our own minds. So when we take refuge and when we're beginners, really the first of those are the most important. We don't know our mind well enough yet because we don't have the strength of meditation. We don't have the knowledge of the Buddha nature teachings. And we live in a very dualistic world. Even if we've heard about non-duality and we believe in some sort of oneness, however we believe in it, moment after moment, our day is a day where we are one tiny part of a huge universe that's filled with all different sorts of beings. And amongst those different beings, there are those who are much more evolved than us, and there are those who are totally evolved, the Buddhas, and then there are the great bodhisattvas. So as a beginner, our state of mind for taking refuge is very, very much one of turning to help, to the elders, to the more mature, to the more peaceful, to the wiser, to those who truly are loving and compassionate, to be our guides along this timeless path. And our refuge is really seeking their help and their support and their inspiration. Another point about the motivation, which some of our teachers make, it's very primitive, but unfortunately true, is that we should take refuge because we want to take refuge. Not because, say, your partner, your husband, your wife, whatever, has taken refuge, is interested in Buddhism, and somehow you think it will make life easier if you do it. Not to please your parents, not to please anybody else, not with any motivation which means that your interest in Dharma is secondary. So it does happen, because Buddhism is very new in many countries, that in families, in relationships, one person gets very interested and either tries to drag the other person in, or the other person thinks it will make life easier if they join. So that shouldn't be the motivation. So anyway, that's a few words about going into it in the right way. In terms of preparations to prepare ourselves for the refuge ceremony, we should know how to do prostrations, because mostly the ceremony asks us to make 3 prostrations to the representations of what we're taking refuge in. A prostration is an act of humility, and it is an act of respect. The Buddhist prostrations come from Eastern cultures, where the kowtow, the full prostration, is more a part of the culture. In other countries, we also have signs of respect. We bow, but maybe not make a full prostration. But anyway, it is the traditional way. It is a beautiful act, and it is something which is very helpful for counteracting our pride. There are many ways of making prostration, and the meaning can be very profound indeed. The main point is that we place our hands in 3 places: to the head, to the throat, and to the heart. And these represent dedicating, respectively, our body, our speech, and our mind. In this case, to the refuge, for the sake of all beings. The head represents the body, because that's where most of our body's vital functions are. We see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think. We have the brain in there. You can't do without a head. You can do without most of the rest of the body. So the head represents the body, and when we place our hands to the head, we are dedicating our physical existence to enlightenment, to truth, to goodness. When we place the hands next to the throat, it is our power of speech and communication, our ability to learn and share and interact, that we are dedicating to refuge, to enlightenment. And when we place our hands then to our heart, the heart represents the mind, more than the brain. And even though that may seem strange to some people at first, I'll ask you one question. If somebody said, "Who did that?" you'd say, "Me," and you point to your heart, meaning that's where you mainly are. If somebody pointed to their head and said, "Me," that would be very strange. And then in modern scientific research, we find that in fact the brain is not what we thought it was at first. The heart has many, many more cognitive functions and associations and links with things than was originally thought. Anyway, that's another topic. In the symbolic gesture, the heart center, in the very center of your body here, represents your mind, your power to be aware, to think, to love, to care, and so on, to meditate. Having dedicated body, speech, and mind, then one goes down to the ground, and essentially 5 points need to touch the ground: the forehead, the 2 palms of the hands, and the 2 knees. So in some countries people do a full flat-out prostration. Sometimes they even bring their hands back over their heads. Sometimes they just bob down and touch the hands, the knees, and the forehead to the ground. All of them are okay. The symbolism can be made more elaborate, whereby the hands, when they're held to the head to represent dedicating one's body, one thinks of a white flower holding a crystal, a clear crystal or a white jewel, representing the precious physical existence that we have. When it comes to our throat, our hands become like a red flower, a flower that's just opening, like this, open and receptive, holding a red jewel, representing our power of communication. And when the hands come down to the heart, then the flower becomes blue and the jewel becomes blue, representing the jewel of mind. So we need to familiarize ourselves with that so we can do it during the ceremony. Also, before the ceremony, you may want to prepare offerings. The offerings can be of two sorts. They are the general offering to the shrine and the representations of the three jewels. You give whatever you like, something that's meaningful for you. And it can be flowers, incense, it can be money, which is always very, very useful. These days it's how the world works. One shouldn't be embarrassed to give money. Sometimes as a symbol of doing something very meaningful, people let go of an object to which they're very attached, and they offer that. But anyway, one makes offerings to the shrine, and one can lay those before the shrine in the appropriate place before the ceremony starts. The other sort of offering which some people make is that to the preceptor, to the abbot who gives you refuge, and normally that should come at the end of the ceremony when it's all over. But very often, very, very often, it happens in the ceremony when people come up for the hair-cutting ceremony, which I'll explain in a minute. And if it happens there, well, that's okay. Technically, it would be better when everything is over, because it is a gesture of thanks to the preceptor. So there again, it's a direct offering to the preceptor, and people in the Tibetan system very often offer the white scarf, the katak, to the teacher, and then if they want to offer something else, anything else, then it's up to them. Nearly all of our teachers these days have so many good works going. They're usually caring for so many children, orphans, monks and nuns and so on, that money is the best offering. One shouldn't be embarrassed about it. It's how our world works, and it gives them the flexibility. As one of our Rinpoches said, I have a cupboard full of incense which I'll probably never burn. It's nice of people to offer it. It's a nice gesture. It's still meaningful, but it's not so useful. So before the ceremony, then we prepare the offerings for the shrine, and then as we're going into the ceremony, if you want to, you take your white scarf, your katak, that you'll give to the Lama during the ceremony. Now the ceremony itself, it's very, very simple. The actual taking of refuge is accomplished by you making the words of the promise of refuge, the commitment of refuge, after the teacher. In one form of the ceremony, where we take refuge in the three jewels, then we repeat the formula 3 times after the teacher. Sometimes in the Vajrayana version of the ceremony, where one takes refuge in the 3 jewels and the 3 roots, then one repeats the words 2 times. But the main point is that you are repeating the words. Very often we do this in Tibetan because there is a sense of lineage, the fact that the refuge has been given generation after generation by those who received it and then give it to others. Most of our teachers say if you're going to take refuge, it's good to take it from somebody who really is the living presence of Dhamma, a very good and pure teacher. And the main point is that you will receive the refuge by that teacher who holds the lineage, saying the words, usually in Tibetan because that's how they received it, and you repeat them in Tibetan, and there's usually a translation so you know what you're saying, and basically all you're saying is I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha from now until I myself am enlightened. As I said, the ceremony is very simple, so very often the teacher comes in, we all stand up, the teacher sits down, and then maybe asks us to make 3 prostrations to the representations of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. That means to the shrine, where we have the Buddha images, the Dharma books, and then the Sangha who are present, and in particular to the preceptor who represents them all and who on their behalf is giving us refuge. So we make our 3 prostrations, and then afterwards we are guided through the ceremony, which is based around this repetition of the promise. Usually it's very, very user-friendly. It's not as though you have to memorize the words beforehand. You will be helped through it by the preceptor and the people who are helping them, so one can relax about that part. In some versions of the ceremony, when one's making that commitment, one kneels with the hands joined at the heart. It is a very nice position. It's a mudra, a position that gives rise to faith and a feeling of commitment and promise. That's sometimes the case, not always the case. We say the words of the commitment, and then there is the hair-cutting ceremony, which is usually accompanied by 1 or 2 other gestures, all of which are symbolic of a new start in our life and the beauty, the joy of taking refuge. The hair-cutting is in memory of the Buddha leaving the palace to find the truth. Now, in the time of Buddha, hair was actually very important. It was a sign of social status, the hairdo. The Buddha, before he was Buddha, was a prince, and only a prince was allowed to have a certain kind of elegant hairdo with a top knot and certain insignia of office inserted into it. Hair is also, of course, a sign of beauty everywhere. So when the Buddha cut off his hair with his sword, then he was showing his leaving of the royal life and his leaving of worldly attachment. Because we are, however we're doing it, in a way turning a little away from just being in a worldly life to something more profound, trying to find the great truths, then as a token the preceptor, the Lama, cuts a tiny little lock of hair from the top of your head. So just in case you are someone who shaves their head, as has been the fashion recently, then it's a good idea just to leave a little tuft there that can be cut. So that's a symbol of your new start as a Buddhist, of you following in the way of the Buddha, starting to do what the Buddha did. A second thing is that once that's been cut, the Lama very often pours some consecrated water on the head. This is a sign of purification. It's linked to this new start. It's like whatever happened in the past, it's washed away. There's that wonderful saying, however long you've been in a swamp, 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 good shower, and you're clean. So this is like a special moment where now the past can be put behind you and you can move forward into a new life. And then as a token of this, you'll be given a new name, usually on a card which has a name, a Tibetan name, usually with an amazing meaning, something very beautiful, very religious, very profound, very high-flying. You become a goddess of primordial wisdom, or you become a holder of the Buddha's teachings, or something like that. It's an encouraging name. Gives us the courage to follow the path. So they are the main things that happen. The hair cutting, the purification, and then the giving of the new name. And sometimes the Lama will also give a blessing with sacred objects or relics or something like that. In the Vajrayana way of giving the refuge, sometimes we repeat the promise 2 times. The first time when we say it, because we're making a promise, we say I by name, and then you say your regular worldly name. Take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the Gurus, the Yidams, the protectors, and so on. Repeat the words. Then we go up for the hair cutting and receiving the new name and so on. And then we go back to our place as everyone else goes up one by one for the hair cutting ceremony. The second time that we make the commitment and we say I by name, we read the new name that we just got on our refuge card with the idea that now, as a new person, as somebody following the path of Dharma, I as that person now take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the Gurus, the Yidams, and the protectors. That's it. The ceremony is very simple. So sometimes when one goes up for the hair cutting ceremony, that's when one offers the white scarf to the teacher. These days, mostly it happens like this. Although, as I said, ideally it would happen once the ceremony is all over. Often the teacher will give some words of advice after he's given refuge to everyone, and also perhaps remind you of your commitments. These days, for instance, when Akon Rinpoche gives refuge, he asks people to observe the 5 precepts at least for 24 hours, and if they like to take one or more of the 5 precepts for a longer period of time, which they do in their hearts without needing to say anything out loud in front of everyone. So the 5 precepts one keeps for a day at least after the refuge are not to intentionally kill any living being, not to steal what belongs to others, in other words, not to take what is not given, to have no sexual misconduct, which in that case will be celibacy for 24 hours, not to take intoxicants of any sort, either recreational drugs, alcohol, tobacco. Of course, one can take medication if it's prescribed for illness, that's different. And then 5th, not to lie to anybody, to try and tell the truth as best as possible. If one wants, one can take a commitment to take one or more of those for a week, a month, 3 months, and so on, in one's heart. So anyway, usually the preceptor will talk about that, and perhaps also about the commitments. I'll talk about those in a few seconds. Then at the end of the ceremony, the conclusion is that you should feel happy about it. It's part of karma. When we make a karma, there are many elements that contribute to the power of the karma we make. It's not just what you do. It's your motivation going into it, which can change the power of the karma enormously. And it's how you feel about it afterwards. Regret for any action diminishes the power of the karma. and feeling very pleased with what you've done reinforces the power of the karma. So because refuge is a unique moment in your life, probably one of the most important things you'll ever do, then we want to make it a wonderful karma. And so when it's over, we spend time rejoicing in what has happened. And I think the best example I ever saw of that was with His Holiness the 16th Jawakamapa, who, after he gave refuge, sometimes would walk amongst the people. He only had a few words of English, but he would say, beaming with happiness, happy, 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 and he radiated so much that your heart just burst with happiness. You felt, of course I'm happy, that was the most wonderful thing that just happened. So we tried to spend a moment in that happiness and rejoicing, and also dedicating the goodness of what we've just done to everyone. Refuge is a commitment, and so it's like a contract. We have to look on the back at the small print about what we are committed to. In Gampopa's advice, he gives us 9 commitments. 3 of them are general, 3 of them are specific, and 3 of them are in common for all the refuges. The 3 general ones are that having taken refuge in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, then first of all we should not forget, which means that one should continually remind oneself by making offerings and showing respect to the representations of the 3 jewels. And one of the easiest ways to do that is by dedicating the first mouthful of every meal we eat. So if you eat several times a day, that means several times a day you remember your refuge. It's a lovely thing to do, and it becomes second nature, a habit. As you're taking that first mouthful, the first forkful, then you are thoughtful, a thoughtful forkful. You remind yourself as you're offering that food to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha of the refuge that you've taken. So not to forget them, not to abandon them, because their meaning is dearer than life itself. We get many lives. But that commitment of our mind is so valuable, so we hold it dearer than life itself, not to let go of it. And then thirdly, to strengthen it, which means to learn more about what Buddha means, what the Dharma is, and about the Sangha. So we appreciate them more, and our feeling of refuge naturally becomes stronger. They're the 3 general commitments. We have 3 specific ones. The first relates to the Buddha. Because we have taken refuge in the Buddha, that means we've taken Buddha as our primary inspiration and teacher. And although we have respect for everyone else's beliefs and other faiths, taking refuge means that was our choice. And the strength of our spiritual path will be in keeping that always our number 1 choice. It's the very meaning of taking refuge in the Buddha. It means for us, the Buddha was the wisest, kindest, most evolved, most peaceful, most liberated human being this planet has ever known. The second specific commitment relates to Dharma. Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, covers so many things, but it has one characteristic, which is not to harm. So once we've taken refuge in the Dharma, then we should try to live our lives in a way that no longer damages anybody or the environment. Of course, we're human and we have a lifetime of habit, but we do our very best from the time of refuge onwards to no longer be a source of harm for the world, but to be a source of help. And then the commitment that's specific to the Sangha. The Sangha are our, as we've heard, wise friends, our guides on the path, friends with no strings attached, a good influence on us. So it says then our commitment is to avoid what are called bad friends. Bad friends are those who exert a bad influence on us. It means when we're with them, we just lose sight of everything. Our conduct really deteriorates. We do things we're not proud of. We get into strange ways of thinking and acting. So if you see that really dangerous influence coming from people, then for the time being, until we're strong enough, we avoid them. Simple as that. Then 3 common commitments, which are there to build up our respect for the refuges. First is to feel respect on seeing any image of the Buddha, a beautiful one, an ugly one, poor quality, best quality. We're not looking at the metal or the stone or the painting. We are thinking of the fact that this represents a perfect mind, the kindest of all beings. And that's what we feel when we look at it, any of those images. Secondly, the representations of the Dharma are many of the books and the scriptures and the texts. We always try to respect those. In this world of chaos, confusion, marketing, these are the words, the ideas, the method of truth, of liberation. So we try to keep them in high, pure, clean places where we look up to them with respect, where they're treated as something sacred. And we never put them on the floor, we never sit on top of them, walk over the top of them. It's a way of cultivating a respect for the Dharma. Then thirdly, the Sangha are represented by, of course, the Sangha, the monks and the nuns. So when we see the robe, even it says a piece of red or yellow cloth, but particularly when we see those in robes, no matter what their behavior, and very often there will be poorly behaved monks and nuns. We don't look at that. We look at the robe and we think, thanks to the Sangha, the Buddha's teaching, and the possibility that's come to my life still exists in this world, and we feel nothing but gratitude to the body of the Sangha for having kept those teachings alive. Generally, there are commitments, along with the general commitment in Mahayana, to try to live a life of kindness, of love, and compassion. When I look back on my refuge ceremony over 40 years ago, I think it was the most significant moment of my life. Many of my friends who took refuge feel the same. If you're thinking of taking refuge or about to take refuge, I can only say, how wonderful, how wonderful. And I hope this teaching has been of use. Thank you for following this series of talks on taking refuge. I wish you well, peace and happiness, friendship, wherever you are. Thank you. Bye-bye.